Now I would like to call here Jasmina Gonzalez-Mueller. She's an IP specialist at the University of Alicante. Please, Jasmina, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Well, today, we have our first panel, so you're not here to listen to me, but I'm pleased to be here. And also, thank you so much for the University of Antwerp. It's really nice, and it's a wonderful city. So, of course, I would like to talk about the first panel, and I have an amazing speakers, and I hope that each of you try to applaud them. I'm going to present each of them. So today's panel discussion is going to be about valorizing research in social science, humanity, and arts. So we're going to discuss how can knowledge transfers at technology transfer offices effectively capture, protect, and transfer non-patentable outputs. And for that, I would like to introduce first Chris Bellingham, if you can. Please, an applause, I would like that. Thank you so much. For those who doesn't know, Chris is the co-founder of Cleaning Ventures, which help researchers create impact at scale through commercialization and training. Yeah. Please, wherever you like. Also, I would like to present Kate Berlet from the University of Bristol. She's a researcher commercialization manager at the University of Bristol, UK, supporting the commercialization and valorization of projects from across the social science and health. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Sophie Theys. She's a graduate in musicology and medieval and Renaissance studies at Q11. Has devised and successfully completed numerous international projects in the digital humanities and cultural heritage from the University Department of Cultural Studies. So thank you so much for being here. I will pass you the microphone for each of you because we only have one. But first of all, I would like to start with understand the asset. We will have to understand what is identified and output in this sense, in this sector. So for that, the first question I would like to ask you, please, it's not a test, you have to feel comfortable. And later, of course, it will be a Q&A, so hold your questions. So what does potential mean in shape and glam research, and how can it be credibly assessed beyond market patents and technological breakthroughs? I know the question is long, but please start. I would like to, do you want to start, Sophie?
I have nothing against that, thank you. Good morning, everyone, the international visitors, colleagues from University of Antwerp. You know that with KU Leuven, we are not exactly a sister of University of Antwerp, but we are friendly rivals. So it's always a pleasure to be here. And I live in this beautiful city. I fully agree with the previous, with the first speaker that it's worth having a stroll and taking in all its glam and glamour. Look, what is the asset in the kind of project that I work on? So I am an innovation manager for KU Leuven in the arts and the digital humanities. I will say that this somehow reflects that the paradigm within our tech and knowledge transfer office is kind of changing. I am the first innovation manager ever for this faculty, for these kind of sciences. So I think that it's trickling down, that there's potential, that there's value in the shape disciplines and in working with GLAM institutions. But we're still now at a point where I'm 2 years far in this quite, for me, still quite new job. We're still trying to figure it out. So to answer your question straight up, that will be very difficult. Give me a couple more years and then I'll rephrase that answer. I would say that as I see it at this time, our kind of projects with digital cultural heritage often involve rather frameworks, methodologies, relationships, value that is created, you know, in other areas than strictly economically speaking, or that are of economic value, but not with an immediate return. So often there's more time needed to really let projects and products and methods grow until the point that they become scalable and transferable. And I think that this is a potential that SHAPE definitely shares with STEM. Why would we not be scalable and transferable as long as it is baked in to the kind of projects that we do? And that's why I'm actually a bit jealous to see here a sustainability manager at University of Antwerp. I think that also in each project we should install a valorization and sustainability manager. Yeah, last but not least, we are working together with our technology and knowledge transfer office to kind of change thinking about where lie the assets, what is their value. And I truly appreciate that they are having this leap of faith with the first innovation manager in the humanities to at least give us that shot, revisit the parameters that Steven told you about earlier. These parameters are in my dreams and in my nightmares, because also my work will, at the end of the first 4 years, be assessed against these 6 parameters. I don't think it's very likely that I will found a spin-off company or have a huge patent that brings in millions for the university. So we are looking with the team. We have different kinds of values that do have an economical finality in the end, but what are the pathways to reach that horizon? That's what we're scouting, in fact, right here and right now.
Thank you so much. Now, Kate, it's your moment.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really interesting points, and it's great to hear that your institution's having someone directly responsible for arts, social sciences, etc. And at Bristol, we have that as well. We're really valuable. That's not me. I work kind of at the interface between health and social sciences. And so I really feel that pressure that lots of you probably also feel, where it's your attention is being challenged between potential projects that might be worth millions or might be a really highly investable spin out versus something that could positively impact, a much smaller number of people, but is more likely to come to fruition. And so I think making that case for actually individuals could benefit from this, and that benefit might look like their work becomes a little bit easier. They have got more support. There's evidence for what they're doing. And I think for me, the potential is showing that the work that has been created, either in its current form or down the line, once more funding has been secured or once more development has been done, that there's going to be that benefit. I really liked what was said earlier about there's no impact without it directly benefiting people. And I think we have to be a little bit creative in SHAPE about what that looks like and how we define and express it. But ultimately, getting to a point where we can explain that, I think, is really important.
Good points, Kit. Yeah, so just to recap, so I run the ARC Accelerator, which is the UK's national SHAPE commercialization accelerator. So I've had a good view of the UK's pipeline for about the last 5 years. It's about 1,000 projects in total across all the SHAPE disciplines. And I think when you're thinking about, what's valuable, what can be commercialized within SHAPE, I think it's actually quite straightforward. It's only weird for tech transfer offices because they're so used to STEM, but actually STEM is the outlier in commercialization. If you go to most SMEs in your country, the way they think about commercialization is how you'll probably think about SHAPE. Does this solve someone's problem? Does it add value? Will they pay for it? It's kind of just those 3 questions. And that's all there is to it. It's quite easy. You're essentially building a consultancy company for most of SHAPE projects. They've got know-how, that is their main asset, and then they have things like methodology, training, accreditation. Sometimes there's a bit of software, but it's usually not like the critical part, where it's quite kind of a bit of Python code. It's not a big deal. So it's like, okay, how do you build a consultancy business? Well, you should probably try and pilot it really early. You should use consultancy services at your university to do a couple of trial runs, test capacity to pay. And then if you think there's kind of traction that it could stand on its own 2 feet, you can build up through consultancy services, hopefully bootstrap it, and then you can spin out. So it's actually not so bad. The only other thing I would add is that in our experience, around 50% of the UK pipeline, maybe even slightly higher, 60%, social ventures. If the institution doesn't support social ventures, they will block about 60% of the academic aspirations to commercialize in the shape disciplines. Some institutions don't support it. At Oxford, when Kit and I were there, they only supported social ventures from about 2020 onwards. Prior to that, we basically couldn't commercialize much that wasn't completely for profit. So I think from an institutional perspective, it's service, it's social venture, and will anyone pay for it? That's kind of it.
So thank you so much, Chris, because in this, if you want to add anything, don't worry, I have now a microphone, so don't worry about that. So thank you, because you actually straight to this next point of this panel discussion. Once we have identified the asset, because sometimes in this kind of environment, we don't know what asset we have and the potential use of they have. So talking about commercialization, that's one of the main barriers, and that's why actually IMPAC3T has been developed in order to help and assist you. So in this sense, I'm going to go with a more straightforward question. And I will start with you, maybe Kit, if you have the microphone, you will have to start then. So it's, in this sense, how do you assess and test commercial potential disclosure?
Yeah, so I think what Chris was saying is a lot of how we do that. So can you test something early, fast and cheaply? In Bristol, we do a lot of that actually using Elucid, not sponsored, but they're great. So we tend to put things on there, get the academic to prove that people want to download it, and then assess what people are saying about it. If people are going to access these materials anyway because they're being disseminated, we might as well track how people are accessing it and what numbers are being got through that. I think also it's quite something that a lot of academics have resistance to, but that I think is really important, is this market validation piece. So actually going out and having conversations. To us, it's a lot less scary because that's a lot of what we do. But to a lot of these academics, it's really stepping out of comfort zones and can be quite challenging and uncomfortable for them. But I think those two together, so testing cheaply, fast, and proving that there's something there, and having those conversations and those first-hand accounts are really crucial.
Thank you. You want to say, go, Chris? I'm going to change each time, so don't worry. Yeah. You were surprised when the microphone arrived.
Yeah, I think just to add to Kit's point, which I 100% agree with, as I mentioned before, use consultancy services. Usually they're adjacent to the tech transfer office, and it's a quick way to do a contract, test some training, test a workshop, like super easy. You can test market demand. Hopefully they can retain the revenue from it and the university doesn't swipe it all, because then they can use that to develop their product. The second big thing is that Shape, in general, I think the IP is not that relevant for Shape, because you can't patent anything pretty much. Like, I've not seen a single patent in like the 1,000 projects we worked on, even when the academics were desperate for one because they thought it made them look as good as their physicist peers. It's like, sorry, this won't work. So it's all soft IP. And there's not much you can do with that, right? Copyright's automatic. You could use a trademark, but like most of the time, why bother? So there's no barrier to market. That's the really good thing with Shape. You can just go straight to it. You don't have to worry about filing the patent before you tell anyone. You just go, and that's it. So it's dead easy. So you might say, well, what's the defense? Well, the defense is going to market quickly and building a brand around their academic expertise, because the key thing they have is the know-how. Almost always, even if they've got software, even if they got even like an algorithm, most of the time it's the application of that to a real world problem, and it requires the academic know-how to do that. So that is the top thing, and that is automatically protected because they're Professor X at University Y, so they've already got that brand, great. And then the rest of it is just about building a company that goes to market quickly.
Okay, now Sophie, I would like to know your insight.
Yeah, I feel like a strange bird a little bit because I come to the table here with okay, this recent experience as an innovation manager. It's all rooted in working for over 13 years, really with museums, libraries, and archives in a wide variety of European digital cultural heritage projects. So I'm really, really used to working on Horizon projects, Digital Europe program, Erasmus+, that kind of thing. So my work as a curator, a storyteller, a workshopper, a user engagement officer has always been directly one-on-one with people actually working at cultural heritage premises. This means two things. First of all, when you say to me commercialization, my first intuitive gut instinct is there is a certain iffiness about that word, because we believe truly in cultural heritage projects that we are working for the society. We do not need this commercialization to assess the value of our own projects. But of course, now in this new role, my thinking is also changing. There is no iffiness about being commercial and making sure that others are find a good product in what you produce during a project, benefit from your methodologies, reuse your frameworks. In fact, it's so good to see that project results can stay alive after the 4-year project term that you've invested in it, and that it takes on, new dynamics in other contexts. So what is now our strategy to arrive to the point of a certain viability in terms of commercialization? It really is the co-creative strategy. So rather than saying, I'm going to do this project because I think it's interesting, this is my objective, and after the project is over, I will go to stakeholders and say, look what I got, don't you want to use it? No, we put the stakeholders in the very, very first stages of that cycle. So even in the project proposal cycle, we try to take on the eventual end users, the stakeholders, the commercial clients. We try to take them very upfront into the loop. And I want to use 5 seconds before I hand back the microphone to say something about our most recent project. It was called The Bias, short-term project, 2 years only, in which we developed together with GLAM institutions, with content aggregators, and with communities, small communities like the Congolese diaspora in Belgium. We work together with them as a heritage community to develop a tool that is an AI-supported tool that detects harmful use of language in cultural metadata. Every single library, archive, and museum is dealing with this problem. You get public funding, you are kind of obliged to push any newly digitized content into the open, right? What happens when, like KU Leuven, you have an archive where a lot of missionary and colonial collections are being kept? You often have legacy metadata really in a language that we do not consider to be okay anymore. So push that online and you'll get a huge fallout. So the debias tool helps actually to raise a flag and tell you, think twice before you put this content online. Go back, put some research into it, put some contextualization into it. Well, in all of my 13 years, I've never had so many responses on a project as on the bias. And we are now looking into how we can go on to commercialize this. I wouldn't have put the two together, let's say 5 years ago, but now I actually think we are helping and supporting the sector in growing into this digital realm, rather than being iffy with something that we developed out of social and ethical concerns.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and also for telling about this project, because it's quite important, and also to raise awareness to take the stakeholders at the beginning. I think it's quite important, and we have to do that practice more often. So now I will go with a more philosophical question, may say, in the sense that I would like to know your insight. Prepare, because it's a long question, but I know you will manage. So where do GLAM and SHEM researchers most often disengage from knowledge transfer processes at disclosure, at proof of concept or at the point of transfer. Does this give us any clues as to where system may have to change? I know it's long to process, but go ahead, Chris. You have the microphone, so you have to start.
I'm actually going to disagree with the premise of the question and say that disengagement starts even at the point of considering commercialization. I think the vast majority of SHAPE researchers have not ever considered commercialization compared with their STEM peers. I mean, sure, most STEM researchers are probably also not thinking about commercialization, but the awareness level is probably much higher. Whereas in SHAPE, the traditional paths to impact have been policy, communication, these kinds of methods. I also think there's probably a little more residual antipathy to commercialization within SHAPE kind of departments. They typically think it's selling out. It's not for the public good. That's not why they're a researcher. And I think that's the main barrier to entry, really. So I think that's the bit that you have to change. It's that culture change and awareness part. And I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. Firstly, is ignore the cranky old ones. They're not going to change their mind. It's much better in general to work with, generally, the younger researchers are probably more tuned into entrepreneurial thinking because it's become a bigger deal in Europe. Obviously, don't ignore the old ones if they're keen. Secondly, don't get too caught up on the word commercialization, valorization. I remember when I was at Oxford, we ran something called the Humanities Innovation Challenge to try and get humanities academics involved. And the head of humanities said, yeah, this is great, Chris. The problem is we don't like the word humanities innovation and we don't like the word challenge. And I was like, okay. The thing about commercialization is, or valorization, the word, just use the word. Don't worry about trying to come up with something clever. What you need to do is show them examples by their peers that they can relate to. Show the education department a really good education venture, show the social policy one, the social one. And they will go, oh, actually, it can't be that bad if so-and-so, who is a respected academic, has also chosen to build venture X, venture Y. So they need to change what they understand by the word valorization and see what it can do for their impact. So I would say that's the key. And then from a tech transfer point of view, so that you're not wasting your time, only work with the keen ones. If they're not keen and they're not willing to do the work, because this is the thing, there's no like venture capital for the vast majority of SHAPE, right? When we were at Oxford, we could sometimes just say, okay, we've got some great IP. We know there's going to be venture capital investment. We can just bring in an external CEO and they'll work for sweat equity because they know there's venture capital coming. There's no way you can do that in SHAPE. The vast majority will never attract venture capital. And the IP is in the know-how, which means the academic has to do the work at the start, which means you can only work with them if they're willing to do the work of commercialization, market validation, selling, all of it. It's a tall ask. So that's why you can only work with the keen ones. Otherwise, you'll waste your time.
Yeah, I want to immediately follow up on Chris' points. I think in this sector, we often underestimate ourselves chronically. So we don't realize the value sometimes in what it is that we do or that we have. Let's think again of cultural data. In an age more and more increasingly determined by AI tools or AI-supported tools, data is valuable. Cultural data is considered to be, the pinnacle of data quality because it's often very rich, very expressive, very well curated. But many GLAM institutions don't realize. They say no to any AI or any algorithm using their data, their collections. What is there our problem? Exactly what Chris said. How are you going to demonstrate how products can work in the market? If you don't want to call your colleagues a market, then don't, but that's the reality of it. How are you going to demonstrate that if you have no use cases, if you have no products? This is always my plea to my colleagues. Even if you think that the mountain is high, too high to climb, from looking for funding and follow-up funding and trying to gain some capital and the trust of your knowledge institution and some stakeholders that can think of you from the very beginning. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, but if some of us don't do it, even for smaller projects, how are we going to demonstrate that markets can work for us, that commercialization and valorization routes are possible for us? I often say, just venture in there, just throw yourself into it. What is not lost is one, I would say, and learns us valuable lessons, and the things that didn't go to plan, maybe next time we'll do better. But if everybody sits still like a rabbit in the headlights, then definitely valorization for shape disciplines is not going to boom and to rise to the level of our STEM colleagues. Maybe to round that off, as I said, I'm the only valorization manager for the humanities and the arts. There are over 40 for all the STEM disciplines. So there is this, that's the size of things.
I didn't realize there was such a discrepancy. That's really, yeah. We have, I guess, coming back to the original question about where people fall out of the pipeline, I think it's more of a slow fizzle that people drop out throughout and they get disencouraged at almost every stage. At least at Bristol, I've noticed my academics, you have to fill in this form and do your invention disclosure and do your due diligence, and it's all catered towards STEM. It all mentions patents, it all mentions these tangible IP outputs, and every time they see that, they feel like they don't belong or we're not catering to them. And so a bit of work that myself and colleagues are doing at the moment is adapting all of these forms so that basically does exactly the same thing, but it centers those people so they feel like they belong, they're more likely to engage, and their projects are more likely to make it towards the end of that pipeline. I think the case study thing and the evidence that other people have done it that you both mentioned is really important as well. But also you might do the work and have these ventures, but just because they exist, it doesn't mean people know about them. And a big piece of work that my colleague has done this year is showcasing those ventures that were created. So Bristol have had 12 social ventures created within 2.5 years. I think we're now up to about 15. But there was a big piece of work done about marketing that to senior leadership, telling other academics within the university about that and shouting about it outside. So on these 3 different levels, so that people understand that this work is impactful. So others know that someone else in their department created a social venture and it's going well and it's successful and they might be able to do similar. So I think all of these different things together to make people feel like they belong in that process, they are being supported, we are there to help them. Just because their research is different to the norm, that doesn't mean that it's not a good piece of research that deserves to be valorized. And coming back to the word commercialization as well, this is something that made me laugh because my job title is Research Commercialization Manager. It's on all my emails, it's everywhere. But I hate the word commercialization in those contexts because it just turns people off instantly. And so I feel myself going into meetings and introducing myself and saying, it's not what you think. I'm not here trying to, do the classic commercialization. If it's using any commercial methods, that falls in it. And that's how I would define commercialization to my kind of academic colleagues. And I feel like that can sort of ease their concerns that even that they're just talking to me, I feel like that can feel like selling out. So it is about the culture change piece, but ultimately before that has to be some adaptation and some leeway on use of language and what people understand.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And also, because I think it's quite interesting what you're saying, Kit, you raised the commercialization. Maybe we have to change the word. Maybe we have to think another term. Maybe we can do that as an exercise for later. But okay, now we have passed to the assets identification, then to commercialization. We will change the word term. And now I will like, because you actually, Chris, was saying something about patentable and things like that, like IP rights and how to protect it. So now I would like to have this final part, like talking about how to protect and assess this kind of asset. In this sense, the question is more like, what needs to change at proof of concept and early stage funding levels so that non-patentable shape and gram outputs are seen as investment ready rather than not sufficient solid? I know the question is quite large, but you have been managing so far. So sorry, it's your turn.
So as you know, I don't really believe in protecting shape intellectual property by and large, because I don't think it can be realistically protected. The patent is the only tool, and even the patent's probably overused in STEM. So I do believe in brand protection by going to market early. as a key one. I think in terms of proof of concept funding, I think the main issue is actually eligibility within the funder criteria. I think usually the funder will, because I think old school tech transfer is quite IP focused, right? Especially in the older days when licensing was the primary mechanism. The language will often talk about what's the IP protection, and that'll be an eligibility box in proof of concept funding. So if you can't do that, a lot of shape IP, and especially in areas like creative industries, will just be ruled out straight off the bat. So I think actually what you're looking for as a test is the market demand. So the thing you should be asking for is how have they validated that there is demand for this? It could be public sector, could be industry, it doesn't really matter. Have they had market validation conversations? How have they used that to inform the development of the product or service? And ideally, because the barrier is so low, I think they should have been able to sell something most of the time, unless it's like, intensive creative tech stuff. They should be able to do a workshop. It's not a big ask, and be able to say, yeah, I did like a £400 afternoon workshop for my training to the health service or whatever it is. If you've got that, you should absolutely go straight through the proof of concept funding to the end of the line, because you have proven it. And I will say happily, the UK's recent proof of concept funding was much friendlier to Shape, because we in the community in the UK kind of fed all this back to UKRI, the head funder, and said, in your rounds, you need to include different options of eligibility, and you need to get over IP protection as the main lead indicator for commercial potential. One, because it doesn't apply to Shape, and two, it doesn't actually apply to a lot of STEM either.
Thank you, Chris. Now, Kate, it's your turn.
Yeah, so I think eligibility is one thing, but I also think clearer guidelines on what impact looks like and what good looks like within those grants is really important, especially if there aren't people in the tech transfer offices who are able to support them and give that guidance, allowing people to get to that point of having that proof of concept funding, so then they can be better supported because they've already had the funding. If we're allowing people to be able to do that themselves, that would be fantastic. Coming back to the UK's proof of concept funding, one of my projects that was a Shape project got funded through that, and we were all very pleasantly surprised, but very excited, because it's a big grant. This was a project where know-how is the primary asset. It's all about film and TV and attention, and how you can understand from psychology where attention is really peaks within a piece of content and where it diminishes, and that could be useful for editors, etc. I think the fact that a piece of software exists, we'd been through a program where we did lots of market validation. We'd got some big names on board. That was what really gave that validation piece. We don't have a patent. We have a piece of research software that, it works, but it's flimsy at best. The academic credentials and the way that we presented that impact case, I think, is potentially what gave us some of that step up. And it was definitely noticeable within that funding that there were changes. There's still a long way to go. I know that not that many Shape projects got funded, and that so more proportionally, although compared to the number of, the proportion within the wider tech transfer environment in the UK, it's definitely not the same. But yeah, I think being clear within all different levels is really important.
Yeah, I think I personally don't know so much about pathways for proof of concept funding in the UK. My experience is, as I sketched out before, rather in these big international projects where you often, especially in the innovation actions, you have to demonstrate that you're coming out with something that is replicable, scalable, sustainable, valorizable. So I would say, to my experience, that's the pathway we have most often followed. But recently, we have started to try and play with some other schemes. So, for instance, last October, we won 2 projects that are actually funded by Flanders, with money destined for cultural and non-cultural partnerships with a view to innovation in very short-term projects. These are like 2 years of project, where indeed a GLAM institution is obliged to work with a cultural institution to innovate together and create something that other sectoral stakeholders can go on to use. So through that whole process, you will have your proof of concept and hopefully even a sort of a prototype. It's going to be interesting. One project is about AI software or a whole workflow, in fact, to help identify numismatic collections. You cannot imagine how many museums and libraries have a bag of coins somewhere in a corner that they don't know what to do with it. Every coin has a story. The stories are completely locked in. So if we can design an automated workflow to recognize, in fact, with visual recognition and with annotation, what coins are in a collection, you know, we're 10 steps further. The other project is about installing a huge statue in different schools and to use it as a point of departure to talk with 16, 17 years old about discovering that there are other worldviews than your own. So this is kind of the broadening of the state of mind that we're going to try to leverage by using art and digital art forms. So it's going to be hugely exciting. Maybe one last example, also our own university has now funded for the first time a project in which we work together with the AI engineers and the humanities. It's kind of a blue sky project where we can do fundamental but very experimental research, but we're doing it together with a stakeholder, namely the Rubenshuis here in Antwerp. If you have the chance, you can not yet visit the house where Rubens used to live because they are rounding off the renovations, but you can visit the immersive digital experience as well as the beautiful gardens. I wholeheartedly advise that you do. But in the digital experience, you will see that some manually curated interactive features have been placed. And if you know how big the corpus of Rubens' works is all around the world, you will realize that manually curating such an experience, you know, it's not feasible for 10 curators in a lifetime. There's so much stuff to get through. So what we're going to try to do with the AI engineers is to explore that corpus in novel ways to help the curators to design more, what shall I say, more flourishing or more engaging and more diversified kinds of digital experiences. So again, I hope that with the money from the university, it's a good chunk, it's more than €500,000, that we will come out with something that other sectoral players can go on to use.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and also for telling us all these projects, because I will definitely search for them. So last, for finalizing this panel, I would like just one small question in the sense that as you are familiarized with IMPAC3IP, our project, for example, in your area of expertise, if you feel like the toolbox that we have been developing can help you or assist you in each of your own day-to-day basis life, that would be nice to know your insight. You like to start, Sophie?
Yes,
you have
yes.
the microphone, you start.
So of the three themes, the IP and the co-creative ones speak to me a lot. Also the crisis one, I work as as a volunteer, I am the chair of the Europeana Network Association. So these are 6,000 people all over the world who work in or around digital cultural heritage. And we have a working group on supporting the sector in Ukraine. So when it comes to crisis management and assessing, actions in support of people dealing with a crisis, I think I might dig into that toolkit to help us see where do we make the most difference and what are maybe the gaps in the sorts of support that we are trying to offer. For the co-creative toolkit, this was something that spoke to me thinking of the DBias project, where we had to talk about really, really difficult things with the communities that are directly affected by them. Imagine us addressing some really harmful words with the heritage community, with the Congolese people from the third, fourth generation of migrants here in Belgium. I mean, that is tough, that is difficult. Any support that you could get in facilitating those kind of relationships and collaborations, I think that's hugely valuable. And then the IP one, I must say, we submitted a project in actually 2 projects in the Horizon calls of 15 September last year. I'm afraid we didn't win any of them, but both of them had a toolkit on these kind of IP issues, but specifically directed to the cultural and creative industries. For instance, how can a visual artist keep track of IP that someone is owed on an original work of art that they created? Once it's out in the digital, you don't know where it's going to end up, who is going to elaborate, who is going to redesign it for their own purposes. So a few of the kits that we were planning to develop, but maybe you've already done that, would help with kind of pulling apart that huge knot of IP, IP strands, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there's clearly so much value in kind of all of the questions that the various toolboxes bring up. So to make you consider things that you might not otherwise do if you're kind of going through the motions in your kind of standard approach. The SSHA valorization toolkit is something that I've looked at quite a bit. And I think potentially one of the main points of value is if you had someone new join the team who was interested in doing that or someone who hadn't looked at shape licensing before or doesn't really get what they're trying to do. I think there's a lot of questions and points and examples raised in there that really give you permission to think about the project that you're working on in a more creative and different way. I think there's lots of value and lots of opportunities within that. And I hope that as more and more case studies from around Europe come out, that those can be added so that we can all learn from the various different projects that arise.
I think it's good, perhaps if you're new to it, but I think nothing beats working on lots of projects really quickly. I do think shape in particular requires quite a lot of contextual knowledge because they're going to go into probably new areas like education, social policy, environment, maybe that the TTO office has less experience in. So I think know-how for yourself is actually is probably the most important.
Thank you so much. And before we go to the Q&A, I'm just going to a brief publicity here from the IMPAC3T. I will just explain about the classical plus and scenario. For example, as Sophie was mentioning, we have created a series of toolkits to especially focus on help TTOs and also knowledge transfer and also GLAM institutions. We actually have several tools dedicated to cultural heritage in the sense that we have to help how to understand the asset, how to manage and clearance the asset, and also to understand all the IP area, which is quite complex. We also have a lot of several case studies in each of these tools in order to help you to understand in a practical way how to even, as we were saying, commercializing this, especially focus on licensing. And we have provided several clauses so you can have examples on how to implement it in your daily routine and your work. So that's from the side of the Classical Plus, just a brief publicity. And now we start with the Q&A. So who would like to ask this amazing panel? Don't be shy.
I will walk around with the microphone for this Q&A session, so please wait till you have the microphone, because otherwise the online audience can't hear anything of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yeah, it works. Okay. I'm new in this world of TOs, etc. So thank you very much. That was extremely interesting, and I love the vision that the IMPACT Toolbox brings. My question is related to incentives for university, because from what I understand, this requires quite a lot of work. And you were mentioning that we lose some people in this journey. And in the end, what's the incentive for the university to put more people to work on this valorization, which is in the end from what we hear, in most cases, not giving monetary gains for the university. So how do we get people to actually put energy and time into it?
So obviously the UK is quite different, I think, from the rest of almost the rest of the world because of the research excellence framework, which demands impact as a prerequisite for the research grant. So every university to win research income has to be really into impact and has to staff that accordingly, of which commercialization is one of it. That was the reason that Oxford and Cambridge were probably the first two universities in the UK to do shape commercialization, did it, because social science humanities said we can win more grants if we can use commercialization to demonstrate impact. So if you haven't got that macro level framework, I definitely think it's harder, and we've got it easy in that respect in the UK. But there are a couple of things that I think can help. One is that if you fund the research, why wouldn't you fund the impact? Because especially from a research council point of view, like what is the impact they're getting? They hope to get it. They have to justify that back to the Ministry of Finance. And I think having that saying, right, we're funding everything except the last mile. Why would we do that? That's one argument I think that's important. Two, you get social ventures. It's a different story that university can tell about itself to the research council, to society, to its local town. They are going to solve things which actually are often more relatable to the local community. They're working with health service, disadvantaged people, etc. So if the university has a strong civic mission, I think that's really helpful to do it as well. The very last point I would make is a bit cheeky, but I would say most tech transfer offices don't make much money. I think Leuven might be the only one in the world. You know, Oxford is one of the biggest in Europe, and I think Oxford is net neutral. When you factor in everything, equity realization, license income, it just about covers its own costs. Most of the time, STEM loses money. Shape is much, much cheaper to commercialize. And the reason it's cheaper is because you don't have to do the patents. For that £5,000 initial filing of the patent and then all the other geographies you might have to do, you can fund an entire shape venture and get it out the door. So the first thing you should do is raid the patent budget and say, I'm serious. Say, look, I could do this on the cheap and you can have a venture at the end of it instead of an academic with a big patent portfolio and no venture. So that's what I would say. I'd say the very last bit is thinking about career incentives within the university. This is now starting to change in the UK, but the academics have to see a reason to do this because it's a big distraction from their core research and teaching. And they'll only do that if there's stable signals from the researchers, from the university, that it won't harm their career prospects, or better still, that they'll be rewarded for it. But I definitely think without REF, it's uphill.
I don't really have much to add on that. I think you covered it already well. I think for also the outcomes of that research and the valorization that happens can also go back into a grant. It doesn't necessarily have to go back to the REF framework, but that's kind of when an academic is like, I think I want to do it, but the forms are putting me off. I'm like, it might mean you can get your next grant. And that's sometimes a bit of a draw as well. I don't know if you've got a European perspective.
Yeah, no, I wanted to add that no single proposal in any of the shape disciplines is nowadays leaving the door without having that impact and valorization section. So as a researcher, I do believe fully in Chris's assessment here. Actually, your job profile has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. If you're not able to think of a route to roll out, in fact, in a sector, the results of your research, it's not very likely that you're going to get any funding or any time to actually do it. And okay, you know, the old school researchers might look at that a bit weary, a bit skeptical, but I do believe it's a good use of the, in the end, public funding that goes into the universities. I would say that an added incentive for our university to better put in place the TTO or the KTO to work with shape disciplines is that, unfortunately, we will now also be assessed by these parameters. if we don't perform well on the parameters, the next year, the funding from the Industrial Research Fund is going to lower. Maybe colleagues in Antwerp get more, and we will go down on the ranking a little bit. I'm now exaggerating, but it's in their own interest to becoming better in working with SHAPE discipline researchers, because simply in the end, it will return on their investment.
Thank you. Oh, perfect. Okay, you first, because I saw you.
Hello, thank you so much for the discussions. My name is Diogo. I'm the head of TTO and the financial sustainability at GNT in Portugal. One thing that you covered during your talk or the panel was the disengagement within the process of valorization. And I think that at least in Portugal, the career paths and the jobs for PhD students and postdocs is really unstable. So, and for you to progress in your career, you need only the publications. So in Portugal, it's only based on the publications. So do you think that in your countries, the perspective is changing? So IPs also count, oral communications, posters, I don't know. Do you think that the valorization of knowledge is in fact a parameter that will allow academics to progress in their career or not? Because I think that will be a good incentive for them and probably to land better jobs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. This is a huge point. I can say for Belgium, for KU Leuven, things are changing, but I don't necessarily think for the better. So the publications thing, that's, yeah, it's old school, but it's still there, right? So normally when you do the PhD, this is what you focus on and you don't think too much about what could happen next. You hope maybe to stay within academia and to teach a bit and to continue your research. I think this is still the predominant profile of our PhDs. But for the project collaborators that are much more in the field and that get directly confronted with what the market wants and needs, we have a problem. Not a problem, but we have an added complexity now, since we are not allowed to lengthen contracts year after year after year. Now, I must say, I come from such a context. For 20 years, KU Leuven employed me from, I don't know, contracts of 2 months until a year, not more than that. I've never had a longer contract than that until now. It's hard. It's harsh for everybody who is involved, but at least there was this possibility for capacity building and for expanding your skills and to give yourself the time to come to the point when you are already thinking of valorization at the very first day of a project. Now, I really don't know how we are going to achieve that. So I don't have definitive answers to your questions, only that while some systems are improving in favor of the collaborators, and I fully applaud this, in the end, for valorization, I don't think we have found the golden pathway to success yet.
I completely agree. I think it's really complex. And I think in the UK, again, we are lucky because of REF. At Bristol, we've recently, I think last year, introduced that commercialization could be one element of your pathway to professorship, which is fantastic. I've not seen that in reality in SHAPE. I've only seen it in kind of health sciences, but hopefully that will come. In general, I think the people who are likely to be involved or create a venture from their research, particularly in SHAPE, are those who they've done the research. They don't want to let that go and to not reach those people. And so I think generally it is a case of passion rather than a case of this makes sense for me career-wise. And that's really unfortunate and challenging. And yeah, I think something needs to change. I'm not sure what that might be and how you would implement it and whether that should be on a university level, a national level, wider. But it's not sustainable. Clearly, we're asking people to work above and beyond, and it's only those who can afford to do that in various ways. Generally, it means that those who are already from underrepresented groups are less likely to be able to engage, and that perpetuates the problems. So yeah, I'm no great solution at the moment, I don't think.
I'll be quick. I think the ICURE program in the UK is one of the main STEM commercialization programs, and they always start with a graph, with kind of a graph, sort of a line graph. Number of people doing PhD, and then at the very end, number of people that achieve tenure. And as you might expect, the numbers are absolutely brutal. It's like 0.something% make it to tenure from PhD. The reason they show that is most people on the ICURE program are postdoctoral students, and they're telling them very clearly, you're probably not going to make it to tenure. So you should really think about other things and develop other skills, and commercialization can be an amazing way to stay in touch with your research while building lots of entrepreneurial skills. So actually, for kind of the PhD early career researcher, it can be a great way to de-risk what could be a very difficult career. The other thing I'll say is I think in the UK, commercialization really will get more traction with career development. That's partly because the UK is leaning very, very hard now into commercialization. We had the new strategy released this week. Essentially, it will apportion maybe something equivalent to a third of all research funding towards commercialization. This is the new 3-bucket approach that they've launched. It's just absolutely essential to the UK's perception of its industrial strategy and economic growth now. So the pressure on universities to match that and then make sure that's integrated with career paths, I think will follow through very quickly.
Also, I think the third behind you, you have a question though as well. And later the lady.
Hello, thank you for the nice discussion. Maybe a question to Chris, and it's maybe glad to see that UK is giving the right direction to research and also to commercialization and create impact. At the end, a particular question, because measuring impacts in STEM disciplines is quite maybe straightforward, or you can assess this with some numbers, number of investments, number of people working at companies in 5 to 10 years' time. But how do you measure impacts in social ventures created in the shape sector?
This is a great question, and there's no right answer, unfortunately. I wrote a report for UKRI quite recently, trying to basically outline the argument, almost making the business case for shape commercialization to the UK research councils. I think you have to hinge it on, one is return on investment. So shape research is much cheaper to fund than STEM research. Like, that's obviously true. You don't have to pay for wet labs. And shape commercialization is much cheaper as well, because you don't need investment capital to commercialize the vast majority of time. So there's 2 advantages to that. One is you put less in, so you can still get something out. So the ROI number still looks okay. Secondly, you're not restricted by venture capital. That is a good thing. Venture capital is awful and there's never enough. It's a gatekeeper on commercialization, as every kind of STEM entrepreneur has found out. So you can actually push vastly more ventures out, even if the number of employees they've got, their total revenue is lower. And the third thing you can point out is that they go to market much, much quicker and have lower failure rates than their STEM colleagues. Because they're not taking in enormous amounts of capital and having to build patent walls, they can go to market within 6 months, maybe faster. And because they can use things like consultancy services, they can financially de-risk themselves before they even have to incorporate. That's something STEM absolutely can't do. So what you push back in terms of impact metrics is they're cheaper to fund, they have a higher chance of success, and you did it all on much lower cost without the patent expenditure. The fourth part would be you can basically say they will also target different parts of the economy. Because they will target services, they will target public sector. Every country, especially in Europe, does care about service sector. We're all majority service sector economies, and they also care about, public sectors overburdened, underfunded, etc. Shape innovation will help those deliver healthcare services cheaper. Maybe they'll innovate, improve better outcomes, whatever. So I think it's somewhere between hard numbers and making the case of that these are still political priorities that STEM can't always touch. That is kind of how you have to justify it. Unfortunately, you'll never get, 5 billion invested or anything like that. Those numbers that STEM will have, you just can't do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually struggling a little bit with the definition of social ventures. Do you mean non-profit or is it for-profit? Because I think, if somebody's willing to pay, it should be able for-profit. I think it also opens up a lot of more possibilities for these companies? That's the first part of the question. And the second part then is, why couldn't universities also get some return on investment in that? Because I also heard that ETH Zurich, for instance, they look at how many code there is, they assess how much workload was that, and based on that, it's either a lump sum or it's a little part of the equity, which is about 1 or 2%, not more than that. So I would like to have your view on that.
It's more for you, I think.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm interested to hear your definition.
Yeah, you should definitely get kits for you. We tend to take quite a light view of social venture. So we say the primary purpose of the venture is a social good, and you can align that through something like UN SDGs or something, but we say that's its core purpose. It doesn't have to be a not-for-profit, definitely not in our definition. Yeah, so it's just a good. I think you have to eyeball that. You know, there's no, I don't think philosophy has come down on exactly what good is. So I don't think tech transfer officers have to overcome that philosophical problem. On the return on investment, I mean, well, because shape ventures tend not to gain venture capital, there's generally not going to be any equity realization, right? There's no exit event. You could try and get money off them through the license, but the license is weak because the IP is weak. Like, what are you really licensing? How do you license know-how? Not, I think, very credibly. I mean, I did do that at Oxford and I felt bad about it. They also generally don't make that much revenue. So why would you squeeze them on that either? I think really the value to the university will be the story that they get to tell and the impact data they get to tell. We educated this many children. We would, you know, averted this many non-vaxxers from dying. So I think that's basically the angle you have to go at. I mean, the UK has had a massive debate 2 years ago around things like equity. That's kind of been resolved now-ish. I think in general, universities probably took too much in the UK, and that harmed spin-out creation.
Yeah, so for us, it's very similar. I think the way that we define that social good is, it's going to be a bit boring, but essentially within the articles of the company, we will put them as having a mission within that, and probably having an asset lock so that if something happened, if they went away from that social good, the IP would be returned to the university where applicable, not always doable. Yeah, and so it's generally those companies then, if they have a surplus, they are reinvesting that within the company, within their mission. Often our social ventures are limited by guarantee unless there's a reason to have shares. So if they're wanting to get grants, if they want to prove that they're doing social good so they can't take any dividends or you know, realize their shares, then that's a good way of doing it. And for the return on interest, something that I think about a lot and use to justify the free license is, well, these, you know, we're working on all these other STEM ventures. The chance of them generating any income to the university is so small, and the impact that they're creating within that time to potentially getting investment and getting exit is going to be relatively small as well in terms of impact on the world, right? Like, obviously, jobs created, knowledge created, great, but the benefit to the person, if you're thinking about a pharma company, the drug might not make it, and therefore the people benefited is pretty small. Whereas in this case, you can say, okay, it's the likelihood of return to the university is basically the same in most cases. It's probably going to be 0, but the use case that the university can make in terms of people lives affected is likely to be much higher. I've had a lot of discussion recently about whether a license should potentially contain some measures so that you get that return on investment. Probably, if you were to do that, you'd want it to be way down the line. So like after year 5, you might pay X amount. But again, it depends on what the IP is. If it's copyright, then they will probably rewrite it in that time to circumvent that. If it's know-how, how are we going to prove that it's the same know-how? Like, I think it gets you into quite a lot of challenges unless you've got something really solid that is unchangeable, which is unlikely in this space. So I think, yeah, coming back to what Chris was saying, it really is all about how you make that case for that impact. And that's probably going to be qualitative rather than quantitative.
Yeah, I'm just landing with the point on return on investment. I must say that for instance, the outcomes of the DBIAS project, where we started to become really bombarded with requests from all over Europe, institutions like British Library, like Austrian National Library, interested to deploy this tool on their own collections. I must say that as a result of this, our TTO is kind of chasing us to do something with it. Not because I think they respect this huge monetary return on investment, but the fact that we could become, you know, a lighthouse, a thought leader in a European perspective when it comes to debiasing cultural collections, that is of course hugely, hugely attractive. It kind of helps us realize this quadruple helix model that is at the very core of what our university stands for. So yeah, I would say that's maybe a soft way to think about return on investment, but I feel now the pull of the TTO to get into this exercise with us and try to design a model that preserves all the values in which project outcomes are embedded and still, you know, cater for that market pool that we are experiencing at the moment.
Thank you. And actually, we are running out of time. We have now the coffee break. But first, I would like to ask you that applause to this amazing panel. And thank you so much for being so participating. I hope in the next panels, I see a lot of questions. So thank you so much and enjoy your coffee.